we're going to start passing bills in America in anticipation of a war?
Well, we limit ownership on all kinds of news services. Foreign adversaries can't buy CNN. Why can they buy TikTok?
The content on TikTok is not produced by the Chinese government. I'm sorry to tell you.
Companies that use algorithms as the main source of sending out their news will lose their protections under Section 230.
That's all of them. Using algorithms, we've just thrown out the entire model for the distribution of internet information, including on Google. What are you talking about?
Well, what I'm talking about is the fact that communication networks cannot be controlled by foreign adversaries.
Those in favor say aye.
The House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed a bipartisan bill mandating ByteDance, the Chinese company behind TikTok, sell the platform. However, critics argue that the bill poses a threat to free speech rights and represents an overreach of government authority, one that will be susceptible to future abuse. The government, they insist, should not dictate which apps Americans can use. Supporters of the bill point to national security concerns. TikTok collects user data and, they allege, tweaks the algorithm for political purposes, and to the benefit of America's most powerful adversary, the Chinese Communist Party. Joining us to debate the TikTok bill are Jeff Kane, author of The Perfect Police State, and senior fellow at the National Security Institute of George Mason University, and Walter Kern, author, editor-at-large of County Highway, and co-host of the show America This Week. Why don't we start in a broad way? So this bill passes, banning TikTok, which is, not entirely accurate, but, people know what we mean when we say banning TikTok, forcing ByteDance to divest from the company. You support this bill, right? Tell me kind of broadly why you support this bill.
Well, I do support the bill, and I've always supported this kind of bill. This goes back 5 years, back when we first started noticing that TikTok was a serious threat. But even going further back, this is something that Americans have always done. We've always had controls over ownership by foreign adversaries. It's just that we're updating this now for the age of social media. Go back to the Founding Fathers, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, deeply concerned about foreign adversaries interfering in our political processes. Go forward a bit. So we have the Radio Act. About 100 years ago, we have the Communications Act. There are all kinds of laws that have been in place that have been challenged in the courts, that have been accepted as a tradition of our democratic system, that we place limits on ownership by foreign adversaries over communications networks, broadcast media, TV, also infrastructure such as railroads. Even Rupert Murdoch had to get American citizenship in the 1980s so that he could purchase news media in America. This is something that we've always done, and it's not an affront. It's not an affront to our civil liberties or to the First Amendment to simply place a cap on what foreign adversaries can do in America. We are a free market, we are an open market, but foreign adversaries who are authoritarian, who are dictators, people like Xi Jinping, China, a country that I had spent many years in, I was kicked out of for my investigative reporting, looking at Chinese tech companies, looking at the Uyghur genocide, booted because, I had unearthed stuff there that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like. These are the thugs who are trying to meddle in our democracy.
Walter, you kind of look at this as a speech issue in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong about this. I mean, and this is a kind of a horseshoe theory thing where you see a lot of people on the left from the Squad and Ro Khanna, Cori Bush, et cetera, and people on the right and people like Rand Paul who also oppose this. It did pass overwhelmingly in the House. But when you see this kind of legislation, what gives you pause about it? What makes you think this is the wrong way forward?
Well, I'm going to wait to say that for a moment. He just asserted a threat but gave no evidence of one. And that's common in this debate. You talk about the Uyghurs or how bad China is, and you suggest or imply that there's some specific threat. But we never hear about what it is exactly, only that it's a deep, dark boogeyman. And for that, we should surrender our ability to speak, because though he talked about Rupert Murdoch, this isn't a publisher. Remember Section 230? These aren't publishers, right? We've seen a absolute trend, an almost unbroken trend, in which foreign threats are reconstrued as quasi-domestic threats, And we just had a story in the New York Times the other day about how some of these laws that were used to censor or catch foreign misinformation have evolved, quote unquote, to catch domestic information which is somehow influenced by them. And in the text of this bill, as written, it is only necessary for the president, by fiat, with some review, to ban these things or require their divestiture or whatever it might be, to show that they are directed by a foreign, often an individual. That's the text of the bill. This is a huge scattershot attempt to solve a problem which has not even been specified. What exactly is this algorithmic mind washing or brainwashing that's going on? No one can tell me. Is it have to do with the dance videos? Does it have to do with pro-Palestinian sentiment? Does it have to do with what? It's Americans producing this content, and they're producing it en masse, and their speech is being restricted en masse.
If the Chinese Communist Party, if the Iranian government tells a company, hey, you got to do this, you have to gather this intel, you have to partake in a spying operation, China has this thing called the National Intelligence Law, which coerces citizens to do exactly that. They have access to that data. We're talking about the world's biggest police state. We're not just talking about a democracy or a country, that's maybe somewhere in between. This is the world's most sophisticated and largest police state, where 1.8 million people are in concentration camps, and they have access to that data. They know how to manipulate it. Xi Jinping, the president of China, has said on the record in many speeches that technology is the sharp weapon of the state, and they don't have the same checks and balances that we do in America. That's the threat, and that's what we've got to be careful about. It's a well-documented threat, and it's not something that people are making up.
Nothing that you've described is something we don't do here. Nothing.
Walter, isn't there a difference between the Chinese Communist Party doing this and the American government, through courts accessing data? I mean, it's a slightly different thing, right?
Through courts?
Yeah.
We have a Supreme Court case right now that had a hearing on Monday in which there were no courts involved, except the Supreme Court now, quite a bit later, that has to do with the direct censorship of COVID information from accredited experts on Twitter at the direction of the executive branch. It didn't go through any courts. There were no warrants. As for spyware, it is the very business model of social media, and Jeff knows that. If our propaganda and our censorship apparatus isn't competing successfully with China's, well, that's a problem. But it's a problem that has to do with the very nature of this electronic web in which we all find ourselves. China has many ways to access data on Americans. It can actually buy that data. If this bill was about the expropriation of American data in general, then it would be another bill. But it's not. It's a structure for the banning or the restriction or the divestiture of any number of hypothetical websites, applications, etc. It has a strange carve-out for companies that deal with product reviews. I don't know which company got in there and called their senator and said, hey, you're stepping on our toes here, and got this exclusion. But none of what he's said is anything but business as usual for the internet, social media, and so on.
The Chinese government runs a surveillance system called Skynet. That's literally what the Communist Party named it, like they were watching Terminator. They run an AI system called the IJOP, the Integrated Joint Operations Platform. It sucks up data on every single citizen and sends it straight to the government. It's not the same as the decentralized system we have here.
Why aren't we banning that, Jeff?
Well, I do agree that we need a privacy law here.
Why aren't we banning the practice rather than this particular?
Well, we have courts. We have checks and balances. We have different ways of challenging this, of writing bills. In China, it's a dictatorship. It's a totalitarian dictatorship.
So you're saying we have no other method but this?
This is the method that we need now. This is what we need because
Why?
it's taken because the CFIUS, so CFIUS has been reviewing this for 5 years. TikTok has been sending in lobbyists into congressional offices. They literally repeat Chinese Communist Party talking points. So Michael Beckerman, this has been reported widely, the top lobbyist for TikTok, he's literally saying that Uyghurs are terrorists, that we need to we need to follow this line of censorship. He's parroting these lines in these offices,
and that's censorship. That's propaganda. That's not censorship. That's the point of view of the Chinese Communist Party, which is pushing its line much as we push our line all around the world through radio stations.
Walter, let me ask you about that, because one of the arguments being made, and I've seen made pretty frequently, is that in opposition to this bill, TikTok was kind of pushing things out to users, saying, "Hey, go contact your congressman and congresswoman to vote against this." And then, of course, people having conversations, and, I don't know how true these are, that the response to this is because a lot of this stuff is pro-Palestinian and the pro-Israeli stuff is not really evident on TikTok. Would you be concerned if the sort of Chinese government was actively manipulating algorithms to make sure Americans were getting stuff that was, pro-China, that was minimizing Chinese human rights abuses? Would that be something that bothered you? And you say, well, we do stuff like that too. TikTok has a pretty big reach. Would that be something that you would be opposed to?
Is that its problem, its reach? Is it a question of quantity rather than quality? Am I not able to get RT, Russia Today? Is that not an adversary-supported website service? What if
this would be if RT owned CNN or a substantial stake in any news media. This would
just
be if
because
RT
they've
or
gotten
Putin.
America is in a sad state. It's gotten to the point where it can't compete, and so it's going to expropriate those who can. It's a lot like nationalizing a railroad if you're in another smaller country. The fact is that TikTok has not injected, that I can see, any single issue into the American conversation that could not have been there by other means. I challenge you to tell me which one, which point of view, which idea sweeping the land TikTok is responsible for. And you can't just say TikTok's responsible for it. You have to say that it would not be an issue otherwise.
Well, wait, you said that TikTok is competing and American firms are not, but the way that TikTok first entered the market might have been illegal. In 2017, there was an acquisition by ByteDance of a company called Musical.ly. And this was an acquisition under U.S. law. They might have been required to flag this for CFIUS, for the committee that reviews these foreign investments under the national security rules, and they did not.
So why
they did not. They bypassed it.
So you're telling me on the one hand that we have all these court protections here in the United States that make us good, but you're also telling me that they've failed.
No, I'm not saying that.
That they've failed with TikTok. Well, then why not restart that question, or has it been settled?
Well, that's what the government has been reviewing. That's what's been going on for the last 5 years. And TikTok has been a bad faith actor. They've been lying. They've been obstructing. They're not being honest about what's been happening in China. And the fact that their parent company has been involved in serious human rights abuses in China. They've been spreading propaganda. We can't have that in a democracy. I know we have our problems.
Yes, we can.
We're not.
Yes, we can. In fact, we need that. In fact, the competition between different sorts of propaganda is exactly what Americans with their free speech rights and their free press rights are allowed to scrutinize and need
Jeff,
to scrutinize.
let me hop in here and let me ask you a question, based on something that Walter said. Would you support banning RT, which is controlled by the Russian government, or Press TV, which is controlled by the Iranian government, two major abusers of human rights? I mean, those are available to anybody that has cable access or an internet connection. I mean, is it, as Walter suggests, something that is due mostly to TikTok's phenomenal success. I mean, because a lot of these other people are pushing out stuff that, is when RT first started, a lot of that stuff that was on YouTube, very conspiratorial and very, very well trafficked, millions of views for these videos. In the UK, Ofcom, the regulator in the UK, has booted RT and booted Press TV off the air. Would you suggest something like that should happen in the US too?
I think in the U.S., we don't need to boot RT completely. The fact of the matter is that if you've got a YouTube account, you can access RT. That's not the question.
So what do you mean by not completely?
I think that there should be restrictions on ownership. I mean, I don't think that RT should be, at least if they're opening a subsidiary in America, have full ownership by the Russian government, which is controlled by one of the world's biggest thugs who's, actively threatening war, who might start World War III. That's becoming a real possibility. And that's going back to TikTok. I wouldn't support Xi Jinping or one of his cronies, or Putin or one of his cronies, having some kind of ownership over CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. The press in America does have our problems. We do have, there have been challenges in our democracy, but that doesn't change the point that these are totalitarian, authoritarian regimes that exist on a different level from what exists in America.
I repeat, TikTok is not the press. That is the very essence of this. It is not a publisher. If you know about Section 230, you know that,
I know about Section 230.
You're comparing apples to oranges. TikTok is not a cable news channel. The content on TikTok is not produced by the Chinese government. I'm sorry to tell you, it's produced by American young people.
It's a major communications network. We regulate this for TV, for radio. Section 230. There's a lot that we can do with Section 230 that would be separate from the TikTok bill, but this is comparable to a major outlet in which most people get all of their news. It fulfills that role, and whether or not it's a platform or a publisher is becoming less and less relevant as time goes by. There have been calls to change Section 230. One proposal is to make it so that companies that use algorithms as the main source of sending out their news will lose their protections under Section 230. That would have a lot of implications for
all of them. Using algorithms, what? I mean, if we're going to demonize algorithms, we've just thrown out the entire model for the distribution of internet information, including on Google. Google uses algorithms. What are you talking about?
Well, what I'm talking about is the fact that communication networks cannot be controlled by foreign adversaries. I think that you're really splitting hairs by trying to make it look like a social media network like TikTok does not fulfill a similar role to CNN in our society today.
Well, according to the law, it doesn't, and the protection that they're offered that allows them to do all sorts of things comes from a very specific definition that separates them from the press, and that's why the government, or the executive branch, can reach down and use this fig leaf that it's not censoring because they aren't actually considered publishers.
Do you fear that this is a kind of a backdoor type of legislation for more kind of, executive control over what we consume in America? Is that kind of your overriding concern about this bill, or is it something specifically about TikTok?
There are two components to the legislation. One refers specifically to TikTok, and so far we've been addressing that primarily. Mm-hmm. But the second, the B section, refers to a website, desktop application, mobile application, or augmented or immersive technology application, which can be controlled or directed by a foreign adversary. And as I've pointed out, we've seen in the last few years that everyone from the President of the United States to my podcast partner, Matt Taibbi, to people tweeting about COVID in ways that are inconvenient to the regime have been construed as somehow directed or influenced by foreign adversaries. This is not a back door. It's a front door. They're coming through the front door with all guns blazing. And as in every case in which a foreign threat is used as the pretext for a restriction of American liberties, we're being assured that nothing bad can happen. It's only this one case. It's only this emergency. But if we have any view of history, we know that these exact sorts of legislation and sort of legal precedents have been bent out of all recognition consistently. And we could, in fact, postulate that they exist in order to be broadened. And this one is ready for that prime time broadening as it stands right now. It could be used in so many ways, but of course we're assured it won't be, because TikTok is kind of, it's the missile gap if we're going to look back in history. There's some sort of social media missile gap between us and China, just as there was a supposed missile gap between us and Russia once. And we've got to catch up, or we've got to stop them, whatever it is. And I'm personally tired of these emergencies becoming so-called emergencies, because despite we've already talked about, no one has convinced me that anything terrible is happening at all.
Jeff, I think there's probably a dozen things you'd probably want to respond to there, but can I ask you one thing about the idea of foreign adversaries? There was a story in the Wall Street Journal the other day about who could potentially assist in the divesting of TikTok from ByteDance and from China. And one of those people was Steve Mnuchin, and a group of people that, were investing or bringing money to the table who were Saudis. I mean, if you look back to 9/11, Saudis seem to be American adversaries, but at the same time, they're America's allies in the Middle East. Does it worry you in any way that this would change hands from somebody who's an American adversary to somebody else who is not an American adversary, but seems to be an American adversary in certain places and certain times?
Absolutely. I would not want something like this to end up in majority Saudi hands. I'm not sure that Saudi Arabia meets the definition of a foreign adversary, since they actually have been an ally regardless of the human rights abuses. But yes, that is a concern, but we also have to look at what's going on around the world elsewhere, not just with Saudi Arabian investors, but the countries that have been divesting and getting this thing out. Indonesia, another major democracy, put restrictions on TikTok, and it's been great for them. I mean, it's like, countries are waking up to the fact that that big foreign adversaries, like countries that are neighboring them, places like China, like Russia, that are using this stuff to actually threaten them, to actually infiltrate them, they have taken action, and they've done it fine without serious blowback. It's been pretty good.
But so when you say foreign adversaries, and you say that, well, kind of, I would want the Saudis to be not involved in this, but at the same time, they have been allies to America despite their human rights record. I mean, I have you right in saying that. Yep. I mean, does that just essentially mean that provided you support America's foreign policy goals, then you can own TikTok?
So actually, I think that would go to Congress if they wanted to rewrite that. So the four adversaries are not actually listed in the bill, but it references another bill that lists these adversaries. And yeah, if Congress wanted to go in and say, we are going to name Saudi Arabia a foreign adversary, I would support that. Because I think that issues of civil liberties and human rights, they should extend around the world. They're not something that we as Americans are especially entitled to in some way. I think that we should do what we can to ensure that people everywhere, enjoy these freedoms of what we have. So yes, do I think Congress is going to do that? No, I think that the realities of the world of geopolitics means that the U.S. government isn't going to take that stand.
Let's get real for a second. We allow this Uyghur persecuting foreign Chinese communist government to buy the American debt of our U.S. Treasury. And we actually rely on it to do that. We rely on that Chinese money to fund institutes of research across the American Academy, from the Penn Biden Center at University of Pennsylvania to whatever. We allow them to buy farmland adjacent or nearly adjacent to U.S. military bases. But for some reason...
I was the one who broke that story, by the way.
But for some reason, TikTok is where we're going to leverage our anti-Chinese campaign of the future. It makes me wonder if that's really what this is about. What is it that makes us different than North Korea, who requires that the dread foreign influence that might corrupt their society be kept out. How thick are we going to build this dome over the United States in which our propaganda is allowed to run free? Theirs is somehow restricted, I guess, though it's unclear that would even really be the result of this. Is that how scared, insecure, threatened, and weak we are, that foreign propaganda now is a mind virus that will turn us into Manchurian candidates?
Walter, I think you got it reversed. Their propaganda is running free all over the world. Our stuff is blocked. Our apps are not available in China. You can't access Google there. You can't get on Facebook. You can't get on Snapchat. It's all blocked. It's all removed. And this is one of the bills that's been sold to us by our elites over the last 30 years in this age of globalization. It's this idea that we can go over there, we can go to China and Russia, we can go to Iran, and we can invest and sell and spread our technologies and spread our capitalism, our way of life. And if we just keep doing that, the governments there will realize that this liberal dream of the world, this globalist dream, is something that's great for them. And, the people will rise up, the middle class, the bourgeoisie will rise up and create a new liberal government that will resemble America's. The reason our elites sold us this idea is because they were making money from it. They knew that China, they knew that all these places are
and they
massive
will continue
markets.
to make money off their Americanized TikTok, believe me.
Okay, but what's happened is the reverse. They become more authoritarian. I mean, what's happened in China is a travesty. China used to be on the rise. China is just so, it's like you can't go around there anywhere without being spied on, watched, harassed. It has become so totalitarian in the last 10 years. And that's because the government there has been emboldened and empowered. The Communist Party, they see themselves as the next leaders of the world. Meanwhile, we've opened our markets to everybody. Anybody who's got some money, who has an investment idea, they can come here. They can buy land, buy military bases, as you mentioned. They can come here. They can set up a giant social media network. We're open to business. They are not, and that's the weakness. We've been sucking up all of their stuff, but we can't go over there and influence things in our direction.
Jeff, are you saying, you sound a bit Trumpian here, interestingly enough, that are you saying we should sort of shut down trade with China because you consider
No, I'm not.
Well,
I'm not saying that.
American trade with China has made China quite rich. Without globalism and without Western trade, China would not have had the economic boom and the ability to create the technology that it has to spy on its own people. So by our interactions with China, economic and otherwise, are we not enabling that? I mean, at what point, the question I'm asking is, at what point does American influence on China, do we have to completely divest? Do we have to pull back entirely? Because everything that we do might kind of help shore up or strengthen a totalitarian regime. It's kind of a hard thing to go around the world saying, well, I don't think we can interact with these people. They can't do business here because of a human rights record. And who's going to decide that? So I just wonder, at what point does American influence, American trade, allowing the Chinese to buy farmland, as the things that Walter pointed out, at what point do we stop all of that? Because we say, well, it's a bad government in Beijing, which I would agree with you, it absolutely is one of the worst. But at what point do we say, because trade, people like Milton Friedman said, the more capitalism, the more freedom. That didn't end up happening in China. So do we pull back entirely? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm not saying we pull back entirely. And by the way, I would object to the term Trumpian. So I'm just a guy who lived there. I experienced how bad things are, and I saw this story happen as it was happening. I mean, back in the day, Bush-Obama administration, that was the height of globalization. A lot of the stuff that we were reporting over there, journalists in China, journalists in Russia, in all these places, it was being ignored. I mean, we saw the writing on the wall. We saw where this was going. And the U.S. government, U.S. elites just didn't want to listen. So to answer your question, we don't pull back completely. I think that the age that we're moving into is not one where, 100% of our iPhones are made in China, but it might be 70% or 80%. It's not as if we're entering an autarky in which every nation is just given to its own whims and can go off in its own direction.
Do we want that number from 70% to go down? And if so, why?
we do want it to go down, and the reason is because, Apple's a great example of a company that has been courting the Chinese Communist Party over the last 30 years. Apple was one of the largest first investors. That was their decision because they had to save the company from bankruptcy in the late 1990s. Cheap labor will do that. So yeah, it did help China. It did help Apple. But after Apple courting China all these years, trying to bend over and make sure that Xi Jinping would do great things for them, the Chinese Communist Party turned on them. They banned iPhones in government use there. They favored local companies. I mean, they engage in economic nationalism at a level that is not common at all, whereas our markets are open.
I'm willing to stipulate that they're awful. I'm even willing to stipulate that we're better. And that we have protections for behaviors that they don't have protections against. But what I'm not willing to concede is that this threat, that this TikTok, that this social media, out of all the technologies that you've listed, and out of all the instruments of influence that they wield, is so unique that we need to use it as the pretext for a broad law which will allow the President of the United States, maybe showing his work or maybe not, maybe just saying Intel has told me this, to start banning websites and apps and so on at his own discretion. So no fan of China, a fan of the United States. Where we agree is that I know we're in an international competition, which it's important that we succeed in, but by degrading our own culture, our own constitutional system, and by identifying our interests with a kind of restrictive information regime that we need because somehow we're not immune to contagion from these places, is to lose the fight in another fashion, is to lose it in a sense without fighting it, because we're becoming our enemy. I mean, it's some kind of a Bob Dylan song here, where you don't want to become the monster and as you fight the monster. And I'm very confident that the United States today is not succumbing to Chinese propaganda or spying or such things at a level that is existential. No one has shown me any evidence of it. Oh, there's all these shenanigans they pull, and there are maybe more people who support the Palestinian cause than there might have been otherwise if TikTok had not existed, allegedly. But the threat just isn't there. But the threat from a bill like this is one that we can see vividly because our rights have been steadily eroded. We can't go into a new Red Scare, and that's all this is. And culturally, I mean, I'm a writer and a novelist and publisher. This is reminiscent of the early 1950s panic over Chinese brainwashing, that somehow they have this secret sauce with which they're going to enter the minds of America, and especially its youth. And the TikTok debate is often centered around the porous nature of America's youth, that because you and I are confident that we're immune to its blandishments and seductions, and Congress doesn't seem to be influenced by them either, since it's turning against it. But somewhere out there is this zombie-like population of people who are being influenced, and we're going to protect them from themselves. It's so familiar. It's such an old story that we're falling for it again as some sort of generational amnesia.
Jeff, let me ask you to speak to that. And who's the Angela Lansbury here? Who's the person controlling the Manchurian Candidate? I mean, I know that you mentioned journalists. I think it was Forbes that broke the story that some journalists were tracked who were reporting negatively on TikTok, their GPS data that was kind of farmed out of these servers. I know about that. ByteDance, TikTok says they were fired. They were independent actors. They did that on their own. It's not institutional policy. I have no way of knowing if that's true. But to Walter's point, are there examples of this? Because to go to a point where the United States government is citing a particular company, one company in a bill, and then saying we're going to force you to divest and sell it to whoever we please. I mean, that would would require some rather extraordinary evidence. What is the evidence? Because they tell me that, look, we have the intelligence. Just trust us. There's 350 of us. Trust us. That's enough that you should be reassured here. Those numbers don't really reassure me. So what is it that you know, as somebody who's reported on this, that ByteDance, that TikTok is doing, that we know for a fact, not speculation, for a fact, that is the most pernicious thing that you can think of that would justify a measure like this?
There is a leaked document from TikTok which shows executives saying that they cannot guarantee that the statements that their employees are making publicly are accurate, that they might come under serious scrutiny from law enforcement because they can't guarantee that when they go out there and say that we're separate from China, we're separate from the Chinese Communist Party, that this is something that we can guarantee to the American public. I've interviewed dozens of ByteDance and TikTok employees over the years, executives, people who have recently departed. What they say is, look, China holds the strings. They're saying, like, they update the algorithm so frequently that we can't even keep up with it. We don't even know what's in that algorithm. And they're over in China and they're looking at the data of Americans. They say that that is a fact. They say it universally. Now, the problem here...
To what end? I mean, the average person who doesn't follow this stuff closely says, well, the people that I know that are on TikTok are 13, 14, 15-year-old girls and boys. What does China want to do with their data? I mean, explain that to me a little bit of why that should terrify us so much that they would have access to the data. What is the data? I'm sorry, it's a bit of a Brian Lamb C-SPAN question of, like, be very clear about what is the data and why does that matter?
So the critics of this bill get really hung up on the data, and they're saying, look, it's videos of my cat, it's videos of celebrities, it's like Keanu Reeves dancing to techno music, whatever. Okay, that's low quality data. Like, it's not the data that's the most important part here. It's not the fact that the data is is being sucked up necessarily by some foreign company. It's the algorithmic power and the fact that the Chinese government, this extremely totalitarian state, says that, one, they will stop a divestment of TikTok. Why do they want to stop it so badly? I thought TikTok said that this is not a Chinese company. TikTok keeps saying that they're American. So I guess the Chinese Communist Party does have control over them. And then two, the fact that President Xi Jinping, one of the most powerful dictators of the 21st century so far, says that this AI, that this algorithmic power is core to national power, while he's threatening Taiwan, his neighbors, the Philippines, threatening American allies with outright war, threatening them with invasions. It's the fact that, we're headed possibly towards a war. I would say that war is likely maybe within the next decade. Obviously, it's hard to predict, but the fact of the matter is that it's not America here that's the guilty party. It is China. It is what the Chinese Communist Party has done to its people and turned themselves into this fascistic police state. And the fact that, this company that is run by people who have publicly said that they want to use TikTok to impose their core values, they call them, quote, socialist core values. They put this in writing. They published it in Chinese. This was stated directly by the founder. It was stated by the editor-in-chief. There was a scandal in China one time. He apologized to the Communist Party. He said that we're going to use ByteDance, we're going to use TikTok to spread socialist core values. That's the threat. So it's not that, it's not like a Communist Party bureaucrat is sitting right now in China watching people's cat videos thinking that, look at these Americans, let's send them propaganda right now. It's the algorithmic power, the potential to use a service that millions upon millions of Americans are using as their sole source of news in the event of a war to really, to really infiltrate and to mess with our democracy. So,
in the event of a war, so we're going to start passing bills in America in anticipation.
Well, we already have
of
those
a
bills.
war?
We already have those bills. We limit ownership on all kinds of news services, all sorts of agencies, foreign adversaries. Like I said before, they can't buy CNN. Why can they buy TikTok? You're going to mention Section 230, but that's not the relevant point here.
For listeners who haven't used TikTok, the Chinese government does not produce the content on TikTok.
No, it doesn't.
the algorithm you're talking about is the thing that makes it addictive or sticky, the thing that keeps people swiping and watching. That algorithm, by some alchemy that no one has yet described to me, is advancing Chinese interests. How? By preferring certain kinds of American content over others? I would advance this notion. When the East Palestine train derailment happened and a toxic plume went over that town, a lot of the reporting that people saw of dead fish and toxic spills into the river and so on came from TikTok. TikTok is a short video platform in which there's really no text, or very little. It's short videos of things. It's used in America for all sorts of citizen journalism, a lot of which is not convenient for any regime. It would not be under Trump, and it is not under Biden. This algorithm, this word that keeps being invoked, does only one thing, which is give people what they're interested in and or addict them to the app. But it does not somehow advance communist propaganda or somehow secretly insert dialectical materialism into the minds of the youth. So it's another boogeyman. They all have algorithms, and all their algorithms have one purpose and one purpose only: to keep you on the app.
Okay, do you really think that what the Chinese Communist Party has done in China, you think they don't want to do it here? Under their laws, they see this as a part of the state, as a part of their national objective to overtake American power. It's not like, they don't look at it and they don't see, oh, this is just a funny cat video app. They see this is a peg in American society. This is something that we can use. This is how they think, and this is their philosophy. It's something that Mao Zedong talked about back when he was alive, talked about the importance of controlling the propaganda, of spreading the revolution. It's something that the government talks about today, ensuring that Chinese tech companies have supremacy around the world for military purposes.
You quoted some Chinese officials, which are worrying quotes. People say, ByteDance and TikTok should be advancing socialist principles. Do we have any evidence that that's happening? Not speculation, not saying, well, it just seems like there's a little more pro-Palestinian stuff, or there's a little more this stuff that's kind of broadly anti-American. Do we actually have evidence? We have leaks from that. You've pointed out there are leaks about, journalists being tracked. Are there leaks that suggest that there is a brain trust of people in China making sure that an algorithm is not keeping stickier, funnier, interesting cat videos so people stay on the platform, but are actually trying to inject pro-CCP, pro-communist propaganda? I mean, I bow to nobody in my loathing of the CCP and the Chinese Communist Party, but I am an anti-commie all the way. But I just wonder, I get the concern, but I want to see the evidence, right? It can't be the instinct, because as people say, 60% of the company is owned by, foreigners or non-Chinese, 20% is owned by people. Yeah, okay, fine. But within that, you would imagine that the kind of mechanisms of the market, if it started to become an app that was really becoming a Chinese propaganda megaphone, I think the investors would be pretty alarmed by this, wouldn't they? And the users too. You have to keep that sort of blend of people. Is there evidence that there's a lot of Chinese propaganda or anti-American propaganda or, the stuff with the Uyghurs isn't happening propaganda within the algorithm that we know about, that we have leaks about, that we're sure of, or is it just speculation?
So numerous ByteDance employees have gone on the record saying that they've been under pressure by the company controlled by the Chinese Communist Party to put pro-Chinese views on both the Chinese version Douyin and TikTok in America. So ByteDance had a contract, possibly still has a contract, with the Ministry of Public Security in China. This is China's totalitarian policing body to spread propaganda on the Uyghurs. Now, it wouldn't be a surprise there that a Uyghur refugee in America was silenced for posting material about the Uyghur genocide there. Enes Kanter was banned by TikTok. He's a major critic of the Chinese Communist Party, posts regularly on it. TikTok came out and admitted that he had been banned. He had been reinstated after. There's also internal documentation, which has been published and leaked, which shows that back when TikTok was coming into America in 2017, they were actively spreading Chinese views. They were not putting up these kinds of political barriers. And it was after a number of these scandals of censoring people, of spreading Chinese propaganda, that people said, like, look, you've got to lay low. You can't do this in America right now. So it's not a question of whether they are or aren't. We know they've done it. The fact of the matter is that they know they can't do it because they're going to get busted if they continue to do it. So yeah, it's cat videos right now.
There you
it's
go.
all this
but
stuff.
I mean, if they're going to get busted when they know they're doing it, why do we have to have the government involved? Enes Kanter, who is banned from TikTok, as you said in the next breath, was reinstated. And that's reinstated because Enes Kanter lives in a free country. The man's name is Freedom now, Enes Freedom Kanter, where you complain about this. And under the pressure of a public campaign, they have to immediately reverse course on that. I'm not sure why he was banned. I can't speak to that, but I'm going to trust you on this, that's why. But if that is the case, I mean, isn't the system kind of working in the sense that, you know, they try to do that, they try to interfere, and the response is so negative, whether it's from users or investors or the news media, that they have to kind of back off from that.
So yes, the system has worked in getting them to back off right now, but the fact remains that China's national intelligence law, which was passed about 8 years ago under Xi Jinping, as the country became more and more authoritarian, says that that might not continue if the government says that it wants that propaganda going out, when the government says that TikTok employees, ByteDance employees have to partake in intelligence operations. That is going to happen because they have no choice. I've talked to so many people in ByteDance. They've all said that if this divestment happens, here's why TikTok is so opposed. Because under Chinese law, if they cooperate with the Americans, if they follow American laws, the CCP can go after them hard. They can be put under arrest. If American TikTok employees travel to China, they can be put under arrest. The question is, why does the Chinese Communist Party see this as such a sensitive topic? Other companies have divested without a problem. It was speedy, it was quick. Nobody noticed a difference. There was no freedom of speech violation. People were still using the apps. It was just in American hands. In China, they don't want this divestment to happen because the algorithm is so powerful. They see this as something that they can place right in the center of American society, right under our noses, while ownership is restricted of so many other industries. They can't buy up our railroads. They can't, as I mentioned before, buy up our CNN networks. They can't buy up that kind of thing, but they have TikTok right here and they know it's popular and they know it's growing. So they're going to kill this divestment. I think they're going to kill TikTok, or they're going to try to kill TikTok if this goes through. And that's on them. That's because they know what this is. This is a tool that they can call upon when they need it.
Walter, the Biden administration, American government tries to lean on a company to censor material, to get material taken off of a platform. Jeff just outlined the Chinese government doing that in America, leaning on their own company or partially owned or a company they can influence on people like Enes Kanter. I mean, doesn't that bother you if the Biden administration is doing that in America? What about the Chinese Communist Party doing that in America?
Because China does what the U.S. does, I'm supposed to be outraged at China and not in particular.
No, I'm wondering if you're outraged.
I don't like it in either case. But that's the way of the world right now. See, maybe my argument is a little too sophisticated for people. It's a two-parter. Number one is TikTok, the worst case scenario, which is being used as the excuse for this bill, isn't presenting a threat that's all that bad that anyone can articulate and has articulated.
I just articulated it.
Well, it's not that bad then, because you haven't shown one way in which it's influenced American public opinion in any way that would not have happened otherwise through other media. And you've only shown that they have various scandals and government influence, which is pretty much the way of the world in tech right now. I mean, I do a podcast with Matt Taibbi. When you looked into X or Twitter after Elon took it over, you saw an almost incredible interpenetration of the law enforcement and intelligence and defense capabilities of this country and this allegedly private corporation. That happens in China too? Well, surprise, surprise. Am I for it in either case? No. But by the same token, we're not talking about China, really. We're talking about the United States. And all these arguments about whether, I said I'd willing to stipulate that they're bad. We could have moved on from that. But we won't. We're just beating this drum, how awful China is. You know what? If America couldn't see that China was bad when their tanks rolled over people and squashed them in Tiananmen Square, then I guess it never will. The fact is we've done total business with China, and we will continue to do it at all levels, despite all of the horrors that we've seen from their government. And we do it for commercial reasons and because we want to stay in a kind of relationship, a dynamic relationship that we hope doesn't lead to war and so on. And that's fine with me. But China, TikTok, everything aside, foreign adversary directed websites, applications, and so on is a broad net that's just, it's like we're sitting here arguing about Pearl Harbor. Yeah, it's bad. But at the same time, and there hasn't been a Pearl Harbor, by the way. There hasn't been a 9/11. These are all speculative threats. You're saying someday we're going to go to war and we're not going to want TikTok around when we do. Whatever.
It's not speculative because they're threatening war. They're saying that they want war. They're saying they're going to invade Taiwan. They're saying that's going to draw America in.
We're saying we're going to go to war with them if they go into Taiwan.
We've got to defend our ally. No, but they're threatening us. They're saying, don't come into Taiwan. They're saying this is a part of China. The Taiwanese say, no, we're not a part of China. We're a democracy. We're separate. And we got to defend our allies if they're attacked.
So now we're going to start... Now we're going to start passing espionage acts and insurrection acts.
It's not espionage acts.
In the case of pending wars?
No.
It's hypothetical wars?
No. It's a 12-page bill. It's restricted to 4 adversaries. It's 20% ownership. It's not a broad bill.
I don't care how long it is. It's got one paragraph in it that's awful, and that opens the door for...
Okay, let's go back to Twitter. You talked about Elon Musk. Okay, Elon Musk took it over. Twitter Files... Great reporting, showed the nexus of stuff going on between the government and the social media outlet. Okay, Elon does not have to cooperate with that. Elon can resist law enforcement. He can resist intelligence. He can, sue the government in court if they try to come in and take his private information about Twitter. Like he can protect civil liberties here if he wants to, and he has the legal ability to do that. In China, that does not exist. In TikTok, that doesn't exist. If the government says, you hand over the intelligence, you become our spy, they do it, or else they're going to prison for a very long time. There's no due process there.
Will you humor me and talk about the consequences and potential consequences of the non-TikTok part of this bill, or are we just going to keep going China bad?
The bill is about much more than TikTok, and it's much more than China bad. It's about ownership by hostile, foreign, authoritarian powers that want to undermine our country. We have to act like a nation state. But it's not about ownership. Where did you get the word ownership? That's not in the bill. It's about ownership and control.
And direction. What is direction?
It's direct or indirect control. That's what the bill says. And the reason it
also can be of an individual associated
it's written
with
that
a
way.
country.
It's written that way because hostile governments set up shell companies to try to separate themselves from the source, from the people who actually owns it. And this is the same. You could find so many companies like this. Another one, WeChat, which is used worldwide. It's been used, and I know this because I interviewed the Ministry of State Security guy who gave me the data, leaked a bunch of data. He's one of the spies in the Chinese government who was in Turkey, and he showed that WeChat, another app, was being used to spy on people all over the world, just scooping up everything they were saying and sending it back to an authoritarian regime. I mean, this is what these governments do. They don't see it as just an app that's out there that people can play with and will make money on it. It's a part of a national project for them. It's not like America where we're just trying to make a profit from Twitter, Elon buying it, wanting to have a hand in the public square.
We literally have movies celebrating our ability to get into cell phones and track people so that we can then assassinate them.
Like I said, we got problems. So the Patriot Act, the FISA courts, absolutely, should be repealed. I think it was a horrible idea, but this is not that. This is a much narrower bill, and it goes after 4 countries, people who are in 4 countries that are openly hostile to us and that who want to do us great harm.
4 countries with a population of about 1 billion individuals, any of whom can be construed as directing things.
I want to interrupt here and just say one final thing, is that when you are moderating a debate, one of the best things is when you can go and make a sandwich and go to the bathroom and come back and you guys are going at it, because it's so fun that way. It makes my job so easy. And I want to say thank you to both Walter and Jeff, because I think we resolved it. And we'll let the viewers decide. Yes, we did. I'll send you a text later, which will clearly be intercepted by the Chinese and the CIA. But I think we solved it. And I want to thank both of you guys for coming on and slugging this out with us at the Free Press.